It is great to be back at work. In my time away, I spent some time getting yelled at and hung up on by people who work for various airlines. I spent a bunch of time in airports, which at this point in America have descended into medieval schemes for the infliction of humiliation. I spent a lot of time stuck in traffic in my car. At one point in Northampton, Massachusetts, while I was sitting in surface street traffic that was backed up, waiting to get onto a freeway that was also backed up, I watched a small concrete piece of the underpass that I was under fall off and hit the pavement. And then today, before coming to work, I spent some time in my apartment trying to figure out if my mother-in-law can have high-speed internet at her house in New Hampshire. The answer is no, she cannot, because apparently we can't have that in America. The idea of us falling behind the rest of the world, the countries that we compete with on infrastructure and technology, this is not a new problem. This is not even something new for me to be obsessed with. But thinking about it over these past couple of weeks did get me thinking about our national ability to deal with this as a challenge, our national ability to deal with science and tech and higher education, whether we are getting better at dealing with those things in this country or whether we are getting worse.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the elected official whom we as a country have just put in charge of higher education in the House of Representatives.
Most of the things that have been done by the federal government that are unconstitutional, in my opinion, have been done for good reasons. They're not malevolent reasons, but they're wrong. We should not be funding education, for example.
Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, newly named chair of the Higher Education Subcommittee, doesn't believe the government should fund education. She doesn't believe the government should be doing anything about education. And so therefore, naturally, she has been put in charge of it for the government, for the part of it that the Republicans control, at least. One of Ms. Fox's first priorities, she says, is to hold hearings on and try to undo the student loan reform that passed under Democrats in the last Congress. Student loan reform, the thing that Virginia Foxx appears to want to dismantle, I think is one of the most underappreciated things that got done out of the many underappreciated things that got done in the last Congress. Before student loan reform, private companies were getting subsidies to give out loans, right? The loans were guaranteed by the government anyway. So think about that for a second. The government is taking on all the risk. They are guaranteeing the loan, and they are providing the money. And inexplicably, some private company was getting paid, was getting more government money just to hand out the government-guaranteed government loans. They took on zero risk, they provided zero added value, and they got paid a guaranteed amount for doing nothing useful. It was a license to print money. Have you had student loans? I've been swimming up to my neck in student loans for most of my adult life. How much service did you get from these student loan companies that were getting guaranteed taxpayer subsidies to provide those loans that were guaranteed by the government anyway? Really? Student loan reform took that shockingly stupid, pointless, expensive middleman out of the system and used the tens of billions of dollars that that saved to ease the deficit and to give more college loans to students. Total no-brainer. Naturally, Virginia Foxx wants to get rid of it. That's who Republicans have put in charge of higher education in the House. Here's who they've put in charge of science.
My grandchildren get tired of me telling them, hellfire, I can take a Big Chief tablet and a cedar pencil and figure out anything y'all can if you give me enough time. But
Ralph Hall is very charming. He is the oldest member of Congress. He is 87 years old, which is awesome. He has just been put in charge of the House Science and Technology Committee. Awkwardly, because this is awkward even when you're not talking about an 87-year-old, but it's really awkward when you are. Awkwardly, Ralph Hall is also the porn poison pill guy. Remember when we reported on this? Presented with a bill to fund math and science research and education last summer, Ralph Hall killed it with what's known as a poison pill. A poison pill is where you kill a piece of legislation by attaching something to it that's really toxic. In the case of Ralph Hall and the math and science bill, it was a porn poison pill. Ralph Hall turned a vote for math and science research into a vote for government workers being paid to look at pornography on their work computers. 87-year-old Ralph Hall, who killed science funding in the last Congress with a porn poison pill. Now Republicans have made him their man in charge of science. Are we getting better as a country at dealing with our science and technology and education challenges? or are we getting worse at that? Joining us now, someone who knows a lot about Congress and a lot about science, Congressman and actual rocket scientist Rush Holt, Democrat of New Jersey. Congressman Holt, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
First of all, let me ask you about sort of the big question that I'm asking here. How are we doing in terms of dealing with the challenges of competing in science and tech and education?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disparage individual members, but there really is a broad problem here in the attitude towards science. It is too many people are operating in an evidence-free zone. You know, and on so many pieces of legislation that are really on evidence-based subjects, they should be beyond partisanship, but they clearly are not. People are falling into ideological positions and ideological certitude that is, I think, really damaging, not just on those particular issues. We can talk about climate change. We can talk about the oil spill in the Gulf, where people were minimizing the effect, but in behavioral science and other things. You know, and on climate change, I just wrote down some of the things that elected members of Congress, some of them very senior, said: fraud, scientific data manipulated, lacking scientific evidence, a radical agenda with made-up facts, malarkey, the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people. This is it's not a skepticism, it's a certitude that reflects an anti-science bias.
Well, Congressman Hall, who will now be chairman of the Science and Technology Committee, he says that he is not a denier of climate change, but he is promising to hold hearings that he says will investigate the evidence for climate change. What do you expect from those hearings, and do you think it's a bad idea?
You know, I'll just say among those quotes was one from Ralph Hall.
Okay.
So that's, you know, and it really is a broader problem. I mean, if we're trying to make jobs, and everybody agrees that investment in research to make innovative jobs that last for the long term is what we need. We're not going to build that kind of research-based job economy, disparaging science and ridiculing scientists. There is I think, a deep problem, and you know, polls, whether it's Gallup or Pew, they show that there's a real partisan difference. On climate change, 70% of people, according to Gallup or according to Pew, who are either agreeing with Tea Party folks or are self-identified Republicans, doubt that climate change is occurring. So it's a real problem.
What does it mean in practical terms to have the political changes we're having on these issues right now in Washington? What happens practically because Ralph Hall is in charge of the Science Committee, or because Virginia Fox is in education? What's the impact?
Yeah, well, practically, they're in charge now. You know, it's you can kind of live with people who are living in an evidence-free zone if they're in the minority. But in the House of Representatives, the majority rules, and there are a lot of people now who are going to be determining legislation, whether it's trying to repeal, roll back things that we've done before. Whether it has to do with cleanup in the Gulf or investment in research. Not only will they be trying to roll back things, but who knows what sort of harebrained legislation they will be putting forward.
Congressman Rush Holt, Democrat of New Jersey, who is absolutely not responsible for anything that I said before I went to him in this discussion, and who's much more civil than I am at all times. Congressman, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Good to be with you, Rachel, and I can't imagine that the airlines people hung up on you.
Oh, they so did. I wish I'd been recording it, but then I'd be in jail. Thank you, sir.